At the core of this agenda is repealing and replacing the disaster known as Obamacare. If Congress doesn't act to save Americans from this Democrat-inflicted catastrophe, next year is only going to get worse. It's going to get a lot worse. The House took an important first step to rescue Americans from this calamity. Now the Senate, I'm sure, will follow suit and get a bill across the finish line this summer that will be great health care for Americans.
Well, the president at the White House meeting with congressional leaders on the Republican side, tweeting big meeting today with Republican leadership concerning tax cuts and health care. We are all pushing hard, must get it right. What is the prospect of getting it right or getting anything done? Let's bring in our panel. Editor-in-Chief of LifeZette, Laura Ingraham. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Mara.
Well, there's a lot of views in the Senate about whether they can get it done. There are even some Republicans who think not getting it done would be the politically best outcome for them. Because
Lindsey Graham among them.
Lindsey Graham among them, because then they think they can still blame the Democrats. There's also a debate about that. But so far, there is not a bill in sight in the Senate, and they're talking about getting it done before they go for recess. That's just a couple of weeks away.
July 4th.
So I think it's looking very, very difficult.
So one of the things I've heard, Laura, is that they're going to piece something together in the Senate. They're going to strong-arm 51 votes and get it to a conference committee and then do the work of ironing out the details of what it looks like.
I can tell you from my radio listeners who come all across the country, this is the one issue other than the wall, I think, that they think Trump and the Republicans, they really have to deliver on. Enforcing the border, making sure it's enforced, building some kind of wall, and getting this Obamacare repeal and replace done. I think it's pretty pathetic. I mean, you have control of all of government. You've asked for this control. You went to the people in good faith, we thought, and said, this is what our plan is we're going to do this. They voted on it many times when the votes didn't count. Now everyone's running scared. There's no political courage. And I think both the House bill actually has a lot of problems, and I think it actually won't lower the cost of health care, as many predict. Talked to many doctors who actually practice medicine who know what time it is in this. But they must do what they campaigned on, or I really believe this is going to hurt them much more than kind of sitting on the sidelines and blaming Chuck Schumer. I mean, Chuck Schumer's not in charge.
The other big issue, obviously, is tax reform. They want to get to tax reform, and they need the funding from the savings in health care, ideally the way they plan it. Here is the president and Congressman Kevin Brady.
It'll be the biggest tax cut in our country's history, and it will spur business like never before.
All the elements are in place to do it. I think the job creators in the country are hungry for this tax reform. I think Americans are too. We're laser focused on getting it done this year. The Trump team feels the same way in the Senate as well.
Here's the problem, Charles. The calendar is just hitting them like reality. The days are ticking away, legislative days, to be able to get all of this done.
That's why I think you just heard in that clip a real slip slide. The president spoke about tax cuts. Tax reform is a combination of tax cuts with removing loopholes, removing cutouts, meaning increasing taxes in other areas of the tax code, so you end up revenue neutral. To do that, you have to offend a lot of people. You have to go against a huge number of constituencies. And that is infinitely more difficult than tax cuts, which are cheap. Everybody is in favor of it. Of course, you blow up the budget. It's a difference between Reagan 81 and Reagan 86. Tax cuts was easy. That's what he did in 81. In 86, he did tax reform. Took a year and a half of negotiation, and it was a tremendous success. They can't do in a few weeks the tax reform because you have to deal with all these constituencies who are against removing all the loopholes, some of which a lot of people like. For instance, the state and local tax deduction and others. You get a lot of pushback from Republicans in those states. So I think we're looking at cuts, which will be cheap to do politically and be very difficult in terms of economics, because how do you make up for the revenue loss?
We've talked about on this panel, why doesn't this president call back Simpson-Bowles, the commission that President Obama set up, Democrat and Republican, and say, he didn't give you a chance, I will.
That
doesn't
was
it do that?
The genius of Simpson Bowles is that it packaged entitlement reform and tax reform together. But I don't know if this town could handle something like that. That absolutely needs bipartisanship to pull off something like that. But I thought what Trump said today was really important, because yesterday Mark Short, the legislative director, briefed at the White House and said, yes, we would prefer tax reform, big base broadening, revenue neutral tax reform, but we need the economic growth, and he suggested that as a fallback plan they'd be happy to take just tax cuts.
You're not getting to 3% GDP easily anyway, but you're certainly not going to get to 3 or 4% GDP unless you have a massive tax cut. It's not going to happen.
Well, if you have a massive infrastructure plan, and believe it or not, your gas tax is being circulated around as a possibility now to raise revenue.
After 36 years, people are listening. That proves that it's worth. Longevity has a lot to be said for it. Look, I think it's the most plausible plan you've got. In the past, you had some support from Democrats and others. You have historically low oil and gasoline prices. If you're ever going to do it, you can do it now, because it'll have the least effect. I was for a refundable one, but even if you don't, you can refund part of it, use the other for infrastructure. It is just sitting out there, historically low and internationally low compared to other countries.
And if they don't do health care reform, they're going to find they have to get the revenue someplace else.
Yep.
I want to play one quick soundbite from Sean Spicer, asked today about whether the president has support and the Attorney General has the backing of the president.
How would you describe the president's level of confidence in the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions?
I have not had a discussion with him about that.
Okay, last time you said that, there was a development.
I'm answering a question, which is I have not had that discussion with him.
So you can't say he has confidence in his Attorney General?
I said I have not had a discussion with him on the question. If I haven't had a discussion with him about a subject, I tend not to speak about it.
Well, that was a non-answer, Mara, and there's reporting, ABC's reporting tonight, that tensions were so high between the AG and the president that he threatened to resign.
This is an extraordinary moment. Jeff Sessions, #1 loyal person to Trump, the first senator to endorse him, kind of the keeper of the flame on immigration and law enforcement. And Donald Trump has never forgiven Jeff Sessions for recusing himself from the Russia investigation, which begat, several steps down the line, Bob Mueller and the special counsel. And he's not happy about that. But that was an extraordinary moment where Sean Spicer could not say that the President of the United States has confidence in his own Attorney General.
There was somebody else he couldn't say he had confidence in.
Yes, and we all know what happened after
that. That was Jim Comey, who testifies Thursday.
Losing Sessions, I think, is not smart. I know he didn't like the recusal decision. I actually happen to agree with him. I don't think you want to have an Attorney General whose first impulse is, I've got to recuse myself. I don't agree with what Lindsey Graham said with you earlier. If he had nothing, he had no involvement with the Russians, he didn't have to recuse himself. Democrats rarely recuse themselves from actual investigations. So I wouldn't have done that. But that having been said, Jeff Sessions is one of your most stalwart supporters. He carries the conservative populist banner, and he's actually doing a really good job as AG right now. They got to get a couple of key positions filled.
The DOJ Director of Public Affairs is declining to comment on this ABC report. Quickly, Charles.
I guess he hasn't spoken with the president either about this. Look, this is quite serious because, as you say, it's happened before, and then within a few days that person is gone. This is a problem for the president's self-control. This man, the Attorney General, is a pillar of this administration. And the president he's always going to have a disappointment here and there with anybody who works for him in any department. It happens in all administrations. If you can't absorb this one issue on which he disagrees, the recusal, and you have to get rid of him, then nobody is safe, and then you have an intrinsically highly unstable administration reflecting instability inside the president's head. This is really bad.